Spotlight, lectures and performances on and around Albany State University.
Good morning, Rams.
Good morning.
I say that with all ease and comfort because I am an ASU alum. And a very proud one as well. I love this university. This university gave me my start in life. So I very much appreciate it. And as I looked at you, young folk walk in this room, I said, gosh, that could not possibly be what I looked like 40 years, 50 years ago. But perhaps it is. I'm so happy to be here among you. It's always invigorating to be in a crowd like this who's full of youth, full of promise, full of hope. And I know, looking at your faces, that you are indeed full of those attributes. I'd like to thank President Freeman for helping to make this happen. I'd like to, most of all, thank my friend and classmate from way back yonder. We won't talk about how long ago. Professor Dr. Melvin Shelton. Let's give him a hand. And I thank the ASU faculty. And I'd also like to recognize a lot of folks that I see in here, a lot of the professors. Neota, I've known Attorney Tucker, I'm not sure how you refer to yourself these days, Neota, whom I've known for so long, for so many years. And it's just good to see all of you here. I want to recognize also some of the folks who are here with Ambassador Gcasbashe. Let me start here with Murray Goodlett, who's responsible for her being here. Would you please just stand and say hello? Elizabeth Inlow from New York City with the American Friends Service Committee, past. And Cynthia, pardon? R-O-O-T-X. And she's an Albanian as well. And I'm especially glad to have Thandi's daughter, Chief Albert Luthuli's granddaughter, Sabangali Montgomery, who lives in Atlanta. I'm pleased also to have my sister, Judy Gaines, who is also a Ram. Is that Pat sitting next to you? Hi, Pat. I didn't know you were here. Welcome. This is really an important day for this university. It's an important day for me to introduce, and it is such a pleasure to be able to introduce to this community again, Sister Ambassador Thandi Luthuli Gcasbashe. You saw the film. She is indeed the daughter of the subject of this film, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Chief Albert Luthuli, and you saw the film talk about some of the choices that he made in life. And indeed, Thandi made quite a few choices and quite a few sacrifices that ultimately led to the end of apartheid in South Africa. And I know that you all know about that system. It was a legalized system of separation and oppression. It so much mirrors what happened in this country. And I can tell you from personal experience that Sister Gcasbashe did so much to end that system. I met Thandi first in 1982. We were together at the organizing effort to end apartheid on this side. And she was one of the main forces behind that effort from 1982 forward until it was officially ended in 1993. She was there. And I will tell you that her work here was very sacrificial. She came here in the late 1960s. She came as an exile. Her father had just been killed, And she knew that if she stayed there, that she too likely could be subject to the same thing. She brought with her her husband and 4 children who all grew up in exile, and that's a pretty tough thing to do. You know, when you don't have your normal support systems around you, can you imagine what it's like to have to raise your children without a grandma, without an aunt or an uncle or cousin, somebody to help watch after them, as our system does, as the system in South Africa does. The children are all of ours, but she did not have that support. But she was here anyway, and not only did she take the opportunity to raise her kids here, free to some extent of what was going on there, but she also led the fight against it, and what a fight it was. And Elizabeth can witness the fight, the time, the energy, the effort that Sister Gcasbashe put into that struggle from this side, and the fact that she was able to marshal so many of the resources here, and mostly foot soldiers, that she was able to galvanize, that she was able to bring to that struggle on this side. She was able to put those resources together to help to end that struggle. The struggle in South Africa, and I've heard her say this many times, and I may not be able to say it in the way that she does, that it was brought to an end by the people of South Africa absolutely refusing to be governed by that illegitimate system. And it was also brought to an end by an international response, which was primarily a boycott of South Africa, which was primarily an effort to disinvest from South Africa. And Thandi was at the head of that effort on this side. So we have to give her a lot of credit for helping, being an important part of the equation that brought an end to apartheid. I worked alongside her. At one point, and she doesn't really quite remember that, she had some vague memories of coming to Albany in 1984, before many of you were born, and talking about and trying to, she was brought here by Mary Young Cummins, who was a young attorney here at the time, and a state legislator, and she was brought here by Samuel Wells, who was a part of the civil rights struggle here. And she, at the time, was doing all of that, traveling all over the country, finding whatever voices she could find to help in that system. So Albany was indeed a part of that effort as well. So it is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to bring to the podium Ambassador Thandi Luthuli Gcasbashe.
Good morning. And Gloria, my friend, thank you for that excellent introduction. We don't have much time for this lecture, so I'll go right straight into it. I come from South Africa, which is one country in a continent of 52 countries, and with a population of about just over 1 billion people. So often, Americans make the mistake of thinking that Africa is one country. My country is right at the tip of the continent. You would see if we had a map here. But very often, if I say I come from South Africa, and then people say, are you from Nigeria? But Nigeria is a country that is way, many, many miles away from South Africa, in the west coast of Africa. Now, as you have heard from Gloria, my friend, I came to this country as an exile. I didn't know that I was going to be so occupied with working with the starting a movement, anti-apartheid movement, as well as working with so many people who supported the work I was doing. Yes, I did not have family, but very soon in doing the work that I was doing, I developed close friends. Elizabeth Enlow, who was my director at the American Friends Service Committee, and Gloria Gaines, who was one of the people who was in the support committee that helped me with the work I was doing. How did I come to know the American Friends Service Committee? I saw an advert in the paper asking for volunteers to help with the welfare system, the work that the American Friends Service Committee were doing. So I volunteered for that program, and soon after, the director, who was not Elizabeth Enlow at the time, asked me if I could start a Southern Africa program. Now, Southern Africa program would have involved not just South Africa, but the neighboring countries in what we call SADC, many countries in that region. And so, indeed, I was elated to start the program. Then I put on an advert in an Atlanta newspaper, asking for people to come and hear about the conditions of the oppression in South Africa. And I got a marvelous response. People, particularly from the Atlanta University area. And so that's how the whole program started. But from beginning, I want to say, America is a huge country, and there were other offices that were doing similar work. In Washington, we had 2 offices, the Washington Office on Africa, as well as Trans-Africa. And in New York, we had the American Office on Africa. Plus, in addition to that, we had help from the United Nations, and you'll hear how all of this comes together with the United Nations. Later on, you'll hear. The United Nations had a center against apartheid, and it was a center for resource information for us, and that was very, very helpful. Now, why did we have an anti-apartheid movement globally, actually, not just in the USA? The reason is that in South Africa, we had a majority of 80% population of black people that was oppressed and subjugated by a minority white government. It was called apartheid government, and this government claimed they felt that they were superior. They were a superior race, that they had been ordained by God to rule over the blacks. So they were white supremacists. And because they were a minority, ruling over a majority, they had to devise just a barrage of laws to keep us under control. Now, I cannot go through all of those laws, but I'll just mention 2. And this was the very, very first law, which was population control law. They divided the whole population of South Africa into 4 categories. And as I name them, they would have their superior level, superiority over whatever came under them. The first at the top were whites. Next to the whites were coloreds, what they call colored, and these were people of mixed racial origin. Then there were Indians who came from Asia, and last of all, there were Africans who were right at the bottom of the rung. So that's what they did to keep control. For us black Africans who were the most oppressed, there is a document that was called the passbook, a passbook. They called it an ID, a passbook. This document had the history of your life, who you were, what who your parents were, where you went to school, where you work, and if you were an employed person, your employer had to state when you started work on the job and when you left the job. And this was important because they had to keep tabs on you. They had to know, the authorities had to know all the time where you were and what you were doing. The passbook was the most oppressive document and was very detested by Africans, South Africans. You will find that there were many campaigns that were waged against the passbook. Now, the other law that was very, very oppressive, also very much rejected and detested by Africans, was Bantu education. Now, first of all, Bantu is a derogatory name of title of referring to Africans. First, we were called so many names, I even forget. We were called Kefas, we were called natives, we were called plurals, because we had many ethnic groups amongst the group of Africans. We were called all sorts of derogatory names. But the government devised a system of education that targeted just the African. All other groups could have the same education, and the education in South Africa was European-based. And the reason for that is that, first of all, in South Africa, we were colonized by the British. So they brought their education to South Africa, but special education was then designed by the apartheid regime for Africans. This education did not emphasize mathematics or science because they felt that Africans had no need for those subjects because we were to do menial jobs in society. We were to be the laborers, true enslavement. I was telling a group the other day that it is unthinkable that people could go to school to learn seriously, to become professional people, hopefully one day, and then be taught, this is Bantu education, there was a subject that would teach them how to do laundry, how to wash their clothes, because they would be employed by a master and a madam one day, and that was the level they would occupy in society. They would have a tub with soap and water, and they would be taught how to do laundry. What a waste. So Bantu education as well was very much protested by African people, but now I come back to my work in the USA. I'm working for AFSC. I have a committee that is Gloria and some other people. Then we needed a plan. You know, like anything, when you undertake a task, you need a plan of how you are going to go about it. Our goal, the main goal of the anti-apartheid movement, no matter where it was, New York, Washington, Europe, Australia, or anywhere, the goal was to end apartheid. get rid of apartheid. It could not be reformed because these are people who thought that Africans actually were less than a human being. It was the most dehumanizing form of government, to the point where the United Nations labeled apartheid a crime against humanity. So we had to end the system. Then the second thing that we had to do, my committee and others, was to have a mission statement. How were we to do this? We decided that the best way to achieve this was to educate people against what was happening in South Africa, more or less what I've explained to you briefly, but also activity in other areas. So we, in Atlanta, I would travel around the country, or after we targeted who should hear our mission, who should hear this education I'm talking about South Africa. We targeted mostly institutions like universities, young people like you, in the early 80s, responded so tremendously to the message. They couldn't imagine that there are people who could be treated like black South Africans were being treated. Yes, America had its own problems, and they continue even today. But South Africa, in the almost the end of the 19th century, was still practicing slavery. So we had a lot of support from university students your age. They would put pressure on their authorities to disinvest. Our message was sanctions, 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 sanctions against South Africa. Any companies that were in South Africa or that were thinking of going into South Africa to invest were discouraged from doing so. Those that were there were supposed to pull out lock, stock, and barrel, close everything, and leave the country. I remember when I returned to South Africa, because of the sanctions movement, I told myself I would never buy a car from a company that didn't disinvest completely from South Africa. And indeed, I kept my promise. I drive a Volvo because that is the only car that closed completely and left the country. The others may half disinvest, and they played games. So we targeted universities, not only that, but also elementary school. We even went to daycare centers. It was so interesting talking to young children and telling them how young children their age in South Africa, the disadvantages they have because of being raised under apartheid. We also targeted the churches. You know, the churches have churches in South Africa, sister churches, and sometimes churches that they established in South Africa, which also had become very, very racist in a way. And we targeted also banks. Banks were a real good target because they gave loans to South Africa. So anyone who did business with South Africa really was adding on to was participating in our oppression. Because, remember I told you about the passbook? If an American company in South Africa had black employees, which they would have, then they had to keep that passbook in order. They are the ones who would report you to the police that you are in a town where you shouldn't be, or that you have overstayed your time. So they were like policemen for the apartheid system. Another company I remember is the company Polaroid. You know, they no longer exist. Are they still around? They used to take pictures.
They're here. Polaroid still exists.
It still exists, okay. Now,
They don't make the camera, but they make TVs.
yeah, okay. Their cameras were used in South Africa to take the pictures that went on the passbook. And so we visited the offices of Polaroid somewhere upstate New York, I think they were, as well as Caterpillar. Caterpillar was used by South Africa. Their machines were used to uproot people. There was another way of oppression whereby the system, apartheid government, decided where we should live. If you were living in an area that they wanted to change to become white, then you would be forcibly uprooted and removed to a remote area where there was nothing at all, no development, not even transportation to take you to work. So Caterpillar was very guilty for allowing its equipment to be used to painfully uproot people from their homes and dump them in an area where they didn't belong and where there was nothing at all. So I could go on and on citing this and that, but it wasn't only sanctions. We also in Atlanta started a Coca-Cola boycott. So it was sanctions and boycotts. Now, boycotts would target particular companies for a particular reason. Because our office, that is AFSC office, was based in Atlanta, the other anti-apartheid organizations in the US, in the country, asked that we should take a lead in this boycott of Coca-Cola. And we started this campaign with Elizabeth. We, first of all, paid several visits to Carl Ware at the Coca-Cola headquarters to explain to him what it meant to the people of South Africa to do business in South Africa. These companies were paying taxes to South Africa, and as you can see, they were also acting as the police for the regime. So we talked and tried to agree with him that Coke should disinvest. Of course, they did not. And then we waged our campaign. Now, I have to say from the outset that we never thought Coke is a huge company all over the world. We never thought that we could make a difference on the bottom line, on the profits of Coca-Cola. But our aim was to embarrass Coca-Cola because they regard themselves as a very good company, which they are in some ways. You know, they support your education in the US. They supported the civil rights movement. They did very, very many good things, but they had no business doing business in South Africa. That was wrong. So the other areas that were targeted for sanctions and boycott were culture. You know, we had many entertainers all over the world who went to South Africa to perform. And first of all, they performed to segregated audiences, because I couldn't go to the same theater or the same cinema or whatever where whites were present. We were segregated. So, but the entertainers went to South Africa for the money. They paid very well just to lure people to come and perform. But now, for black entertainers in the US, this meant that if they were performing there, they could be mistaken for me, because we do look alike, don't we? So they could be mistaken for being an African, and they could be stopped by police and demanded to produce this passbook I was talking about. And so the regime decided to prepare a special card, a special ID for American black entertainers. On it was written, honorary white. So any performer who went to black performer became an honorary white. And I have to say that was very distressful to most of us, distressing. Other areas of boycott were military. This country, through Lockheed, sold a lot of arms to South Africa. Those arms were used to kill us. The older people in the audience will know about Sharpeville, where people were protesting peacefully against the passbook, and then they were attacked by the police, and most of them were shot from the back, which meant that they were not confrontational with the police, and thousands of them were injured. So military hardware that was sold to South Africa was on the list of boycott as well. And diplomatic boycott, that ambassadors, there should be no diplomatic relations, any country with South Africa. And we were able successfully to boycott South Africa and to isolate South Africa through sanctions. And in this country, we were able to, the American public, I have to say to your mothers and fathers, thank you very much. We got such tremendous support that in 1986, the Congress in Washington voted what was called a Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Sanctions Act. And then President Reagan, who was a big friend of South Africa, and he kept on saying that South Africa, he was talking to them quietly, quiet diplomacy. He was going to be able to convince them to change. So when that bill was passed by Congress, he vetoed it. But Congress, we organized again, and Congress was able to overturn President Reagan's veto. That was a real victory for us. And then it went on that after, you know, America is a very powerful country. I have to tell you, things don't happen until this country moves. So after America had passed that 1986 sanctions bill, we knew that it was a matter of time before freedom would come in South Africa. And then, yes, indeed, by 1985, 86, 87, and right up to 1991, there were talks about ending apartheid and having true democracy with everybody participating, having an unqualified universal franchise. So we had elections in 1994, and as you know, it was at that election that we elected Nelson Mandela. There was a lot of euphoria in my country. Yeah. We were so excited. We were able, from the Atlanta office, to organize about 20 people who went to South Africa to monitor the elections, to see that they were free and fair. And I'm happy to say that because of what the American people did to support our struggle, the culture of democracy is well established in South Africa. We have had 3 elections the one of President Nelson Mandela, after that Thabo Mbeki, and then we have now Jacob Zuma. And all of them were free and fair, and there was, and I'm stressing this because in Africa and other places, we still have a situation where a person will win the election, and then there's such consternation about that. There will be conflict, and war may even happen because of that. So in South Africa, we have been lucky, and you heard that our constitution is one of the best in the world. But actually, it could be the best because we've learned from you, those who went before us. We have a Bill of Rights that is very, very good. Some issues that are still being discussed and talked about in other countries, even in this country. In South Africa, those issues are guaranteed by Parliament, by the Constitution. I think, before I end, give me just a minute. After the election, because there had been so much division, remember the population was divided into 4 groups, and then the African people were further divided into 10 groups. There was division and hatred and bitterness in the country. So President Mandela established what we call the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This commission was supposed to invite people who had committed atrocities, who had whatever crime they had committed, to come clean, to confess what they had done. And if they would do that, then they would be free from prosecution. And that has been very helpful in somehow mending up our past and creating better race relations. We also, South Africans were very creative about trying to transform the country. They came up with all sorts of terms and phrases like unity in diversity, like saying that we are a rainbow nation, a nation of many colors. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have problems. We still have plenty of problems because racism is a mindset thing, particularly with the older people, and sometimes it's very difficult to change the mindset, but we're on the right track. And thank you for letting me talk to you this morning.